Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Can everyone hear me?
Oh,
you know what? Hold on. I think I have my volume off.
I can hear you.
No? Uh-oh.
We
I
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Okay. Yay! It just automatically all of a sudden worked.
And hi, Carolyn. I know you asked if we could see your slides. We can see them right now. We'll get started in a few minutes. And if you want to
stop sharing for now,
it's up to you. You can leave them up or you can take them down. If you want to take them down and you aren't afraid of getting them back up, that's fine too. Cool. Yeah. So hi, Casey.
Hello. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I know we're still at the early stages, and we've probably got to give some people some time to join us, but we can chat with each other for a little while. I know everyone enjoys that process.
Yeah. The Hillary and Casey show. Well, it's good to see you. I know you've been traveling a lot as we've kind of gone through the Meaningful Change series, but I'm excited to have you back.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I was traveling. I think I was literally in a plane for maybe 2 of the last 3. So I was super sorry to miss them, but I hear everyone had a really constructive set of meetings. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been really good. And just kind of an FYI to everyone else that's watching, if you maybe missed out on a few of the other events that we had, I know we were expecting the replay that I posted the same day after the event to replay for everyone, but it seems as though it only is replaying if you registered for the event at the very beginning. So don't worry though, Megan is working on getting all of those recordings uploaded, and we're going to post it on the website. So once we get that up and going, I will post it in the our family group so everyone knows where they're at and where they can go back, because I know a lot of people are really wanting to go in there and view some of them that maybe they've missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really excited about the first session after I guess it was the second session of the series, the planning, the trajectory and the goals.
Yes.
And I missed that one. So I am super eager to go back and watch that.
Yeah. And so Shelly and I have been kind of talking along with Heather as well, trying to figure out if maybe we can make that its own little workshop for our families, where we can kind of have a come to Zoom or hop in. We're not for sure exactly which, and with a drink of your choice. And maybe we can fill out some of these trajectory tools. You know, we would love to maybe do one on a self-care trajectory tool, start out fun and lighthearted and kind of go from there. So stay tuned for some more information on that.
I love that idea. I think that's really wonderful. And I just love how many ways we're all connecting as a community these days. It's it's so powerful. And I certainly, as much as I'm enjoying doing the work that I'm doing right now, I'm very sorry to be missing so many of these points of interaction, but happy that they're happening without me.
Yeah, it's a good time. And I'm just super proud of our community and how much we've come together, and how we can have these chats and conversations and feel like we're not alone, that we are all together and we're all going to get through this together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And while we're waiting for just a few more people to join, I wanted to share something, because I know I haven't been in the support group all that much and sharing stuff that's going on, but I wanted to share that Esme's Make-A-Wish is coming up.
Yes.
And I'm so excited. And it's the reason I mention it, besides it's just super fun, is that I feel like it's one of those really wonderful presuming competency discussions. So some of you may know Esme uses a eye gaze communication device to communicate. And despite being a child who, if the average person walked into a room with her, they wouldn't think she was paying attention because of the way she moves and engages. And until you really watch her, you don't necessarily see. She is using her eye gaze device to do grade level math, science, reading, all sorts of stuff. But most importantly, I guess to my highly verbal heart, is that she's telling stories. And so her Make-A-Wish has been to have an Esme museum based on her stories. And so this weekend, we're going to get to see a preview and then a public opening a week after of a immersive museum show based on her stories about going surfing, going dog sledding, and then one sort of outlandish fiction piece about a magical ninja pirate. So.
And I feel like I just need to back up for a minute here because, some of us, like, I had to almost make Stella's wish for her, right? Like the things that I thought that she would want. This is not what happened. Like Esme told you, I want to have a museum and I want like that. She said, I want this to happen. And this is what I want to happen there. And that's just so remarkable.
I may or may not have had to have an argument with Make-A-Wish about the fact that I wasn't going to make her wish for her, that I wanted her wish to be self-driven, and as long as that took. And, I think everyone has this is highly personal and they have their own way of doing it. And then of course, when she made her wish, which was Esme, she said Esme Museum. Actually, first she asked for a little brother, which is not a wish I'm going to grant. But then she said Esme Museum. And then described what it would mean. And now, of course, Make-A-Wish is like, this is the most amazing wish we've ever heard of. Like, yeah, so just give her some time.
Yes, exactly. And along the same vein, but not obviously, is kind of where we're at in this whole clinical trial process, right? How, like, if you would have like stepped back when you first founded this foundation and you guys kind of switched over towards like looking at more SC and AA stuff, like, I'm sure this is a dream come true to be where we're at in this process with Neurocrine.
It is beyond. I mean, every time I stop and I think about the fact that we are enrolling patients in our very first SCN8A trial. And I think about that moment, so many years ago where JP stood up and said, I think we have something that might help you. I cannot believe that we're here. And every time I think about it, I get incredibly emotional. Not just about the fact that we're here, but about the fact that it's a ton of people's focused, dedicated hard work that has gotten us here, including the team that's joining us today. And in a few minutes, we'll ask them on and dig in with them. But, it's parents providing feedback. It's the team at Xenon, the team at Neurocrine, many of whom we've never seen. We see a few people, but there's this incredible team behind them. And all of the clinicians who've provided input. It is just an amazing lift to get something like this off the ground. And in a community like this, it takes a lot of people being really dedicated and focused. And then not the least of which is then the families who enroll, who have to also be dedicated and focused. And it's a privilege to be a family that considers enrolling in a trial and is able to, but it's also it's a heavy lift. And so today we have the team from Neurocrine here to talk a little bit about updates on the trial and details about clinical trials sort of in general, as well as some of the things that families can expect from this particular clinical trial. So, So before we invite them on, Casey, do you have any, I know you usually do some logistical stuff I always forget.
Yeah, no, you're just fine. I think just as a reminder, make sure that over on the chat box, if you guys have any questions, comments, or if you're needing some technical help, make sure you are doing that in the chat box. This is our last Meaningful Change series for this year. It has been an amazing set of events, and I'm super excited that we're able to wrap things up with our Neurocrine group. So like I said, we will be posting all of the recordings on the website. I will keep you guys apprised on the Facebook page as that comes out. And then we'll look forward to CTR in the fall.
Yeah, fantastic. So with that, I'd like to invite our colleagues, our friends, Carolyn, Tyler, and Heather to join us. And I think Brian is not joining us today, but we are thinking of him and he is here in spirit.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, Carolyn and Heather.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello.
Is Tyler
here?
Oh, perfect.
Yay!
Thanks for joining. No worries. Nice to see all of you again, although we did, get to prep yesterday. So certainly nice to see you again. And again, want to just take an opportunity to thank you and say to the community, these three faces, as well as several others, have been, constant companions over the last bit and have been working just tirelessly on this trial and how best to engage with our community. And they're really fantastic partners and wonderful people. And I'm just so happy to have you all here today.
Thank you so much. Can I call you every morning and just start my day like that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It is a real pleasure for us to be here. Thanks for including us. We're glad to round out the Meaningful Change series, and have enjoyed watching every week. It's obviously some really important topics that I'm learning a lot along the way. So thanks for including us.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We're glad to have you guys here.
Thank you for having us, and we're excited to talk to you again today. We help deepen your understanding of clinical trials and what goes into them and how we measure meaningful change. But before we dive into the content, I did want to share an update with you about our study sites and how we're doing in the study, getting it up and running. I think you know that we currently have 2 open sites. We have Dr. Perry at Cook's Children in Texas, and we have Dr. Sullivan at UCSF Medical Center in San Francisco. We have tried to listen to your requests for more information about sites. And so I'm happy to share with you today that we have several additional sites coming on board. They're not quite open yet, but they're getting very close. So just to give you a sense, yes,
Super exciting.
just to give you a sense of kind of the geography that we have. So we have a site at the University of Rochester in New York, a site at Anne and Robert H. Lurie's Children's Hospital of Chicago. We have a site at CHOP, at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, at Children's National Hospital in Washington, and a site at the University of Utah. So those details will be coming, more details so that you can get in touch with those sites will be posted on clinicaltrials.gov and pulled through to the kayakstudy.com website. But I hope that is helpful to you to kind of see that we're moving east and trying to provide coverage across the nation. So that's my
Big
update.
shout out. Thank you for the Midwesterners here for getting that Chicago one.
Yeah. So we've got, just to repeat those, I'm typing them so they'll be in the chat if anyone joins late. So we've got Rochester, Lurie,
Yep.
Children's National, and who did I miss?
CHOP.
CHOP. Oh yeah, of course. How could you miss CHOP?
And the University of Utah.
Okay.
And just to clarify, this is not the final list for the trial. This is just those soon-to-be recruiting sites that we have coming online very soon. But we will have others down the road, and we hope to continue to work to bring others online. Right, Heather? Anything to add?
So there you go. You heard it here first.
Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know you'll be updating clinicaltrials.gov, so we'll be sure to keep sharing that in the support group as
And I will say, based on your feedback, we have been able to change our policy for how we post things on clinicaltrials.gov for this study so that you will have a way to get in contact with the site directly.
Are you saying that me being so loud caused a change in policy? That's cool.
Gave us fuel for our internal battle.
You helped us understand, right? That
Love it.
We want to take the burden off of families and make it as easy as possible for you to connect and find out information that you need to know.
We really appreciate your responsibility.
All right.
So do you want to jump into the presentation? I know you guys have some really interesting content to share with us today.
Yeah, Carolyn is in our clinical development group and has really in addition to kind of a long history of work in various facets of epilepsy studies and drug development, she's really kind of developed a sweet spot and an expertise in endpoints and endpoints development. So she is going to talk to you today about what these are, what they look like, what they look like for this study, some of them, and kind of give you some just general educational information about clinical trials and how we measure effect. Carolyn?
Thank you. Yes, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And for today, we really want to focus on those endpoints and maybe help everybody understand a little bit about why we select certain ways of measuring change in clinical trials. And also look forward to hearing people's comments and questions to talk about the most important thing, that is, how do we measure meaningful change for all of your children? So before we get started, I want to start by saying we don't take lightly that we are trying to discover new treatments for children with SCN8A, and protecting them is very important. Safety, of course. So we always have our disclaimers. And the first one being just to keep in mind that the compound, some know as 901, we call NBI 921352, is still under investigation. It's still, we're still studying it. It's not approved for use in any country. Today, we won't be talking really about efficacy or safety anyway. We're going to be talking about how do we find out how new medications or treatments work in these conditions.
And Karen, sorry to cut you off, but I just want to make sure it's clear. You'll see that horrible scientific name throughout the deck, the NBI whatever 352. That means the investigational study drug that is being studied in this kayak study clinical trial. So when you see that, just know that's the investigational study drug.
Yes. And also, along the theme that Hillary spoke about, as well as Heather, this is a collaborative effort. And we want to take a moment to celebrate that the effort that many, perhaps, of those listening or who will listen to this recorded presentation in the future around the parent caregiver survey, that this finally was published in a manuscript form, which means a kind of full report. And this has really informed a lot of our work and will continue to inform that work moving forward. So just want to thank everybody for your participation and collaboration in this effort to help get us where we are today. Okay, so during the next hour or so, we hope to first kind of provide some language to help educate you around what are some of those terms that you hear related to clinical trials. What do they mean? And then also to talk about the clinical, what we call endpoints or outcomes that you commonly see being studied for children with DEEs. And we'll focus in on some of those that are going to be highly relevant in the kayak study that Neurocrine has started, including seizure outcomes, as well as something called the clinical and caregiver global impressions of both severity and change in a condition. And we'll talk a little bit about how these relate to meaningful change. Okay, so first, some of this research lingo. When we talk about research objectives, that's describing what we're trying to achieve in any research that we are going to start. So whether it be a clinical trial or even if you're starting a new medication for your child outside of a clinical trial or a new treatment, you think about what are your objectives? What is it you're trying to achieve by doing this new thing? And in a clinical trial, we use endpoints. They're also called outcomes to measure what we're trying to achieve. You might also see when you log on to something like clinicaltrials.gov that there are both primary and secondary endpoints. And this is important for us researchers because we have to have a primary objective, the kind of the big thing question we're trying to answer. And in order to do that effectively, we use math essentially. So we have to quote unquote power the study to make sure that it's going to be sensitive enough to measure that change that we're trying to achieve. And I'm not the right person to get into the details of all of this, but it's all about math and understanding on average how we think this treatment's going to work. And then there's secondary endpoints. So you might see secondary exploratory endpoints. These are questions that we might have or things we think are important to measure, but we're not really sure how to design a study around that. So we still put them in there, but we don't power the study where we're not sure that we'll actually detect what's called a statistical change. We do try to understand whether changes in those secondary measures are meaningful for patients and caregivers in different ways. All right, so that's kind of the quick basics crash course on some of the words that we're going to be using here. And Hillary or Casey, since I can't see the comments, please feel free to stop or interrupt if there's something that I need to kind of go back and provide clarity around.
Will do.
Okay, so one of the things that I believe is Hillary asked us to cover was, okay, well, what about the existing anti-seizure medications or medications that are relevant to families of children with SCN8A? How are they measuring their change? So we attempted to answer this on one slide. So the first place that we went, since as many of you know, there are no medications specifically approved for children with SCN8A DEE. So the first place we went was to the caregiver survey that many of you participated in. This helped us to kind of focus in since there's lots of anti-seizure medications available. So on the left there, you see the results from the caregiver survey of what were some of the current anti-seizure medications that children with SCN8A were taking to control their seizures. And on the right, we went and did a search with the help from one of my colleagues here at Neurocrine, Athena. And you can see that the endpoints used, at least to achieve an FDA approval, it's all about seizure control. So it might be listed in different ways, percent reduction, but for all of the either commonly used medications for SCN8A or some of the other current anti-seizure medications that you might be familiar with, they are really specifically focusing on seizures. And why is that? Well, seizures, even though can get a little complicated in how you identify them, they are a quick, easy thing to measure in the context of a clinical trial. So with that in mind, when a company is looking to develop a new medication for a condition that features prominently lots of seizures, then usually the first go-to for that primary objective or primary endpoint is going to be something around seizures. So now that I've laid that foundation, let's talk about the kayak study and what we are trying to achieve in the trial. So for the DEE 2012 study, as we call it with our investigators, but you know it as kayak, the primary objective is to assess efficacy of this compound as adjunctive therapy, which means added on to the medications that you're already taking on the frequency of what we call countable motor seizures. And you can see here it's defined in a few different ways. And I will show you an example of the seizure diary that we're using in this study and explain a little bit about how that works in the context of a trial, because the seizure diary is going to be how we measure that primary objective. Some of the other secondary objectives, so those would be the things we're looking at that we haven't necessarily powered the study to detect a change, is that clinical and parent or caregiver global impression of change and severity. We're also looking at what we call the pharmacokinetics of the compound. And this is a word that maybe you've heard before. And what pharmacokinetics essentially means is what the body does to the drug. So how it moves through the body. Let me make sure I got that right, because I am moving quickly. So what this means is that at about 6 visits in the study, there will be at least one lab draw, and maybe half of them you will have multiple lab draws when you come in to meet with the study investigator. We are also looking at safety and tolerability of the compound. And what that means is that we'll do that in a number of different ways. Some of it is by labs, some of it is by collecting vital signs, and also asking the caregiver at every visit if they've noticed any changes or any new things, symptoms that are coming up. All right, so first, let's look at the seizure diary. So because a seizure endpoint is our primary efficacy measure in the trial, it's very important that we do our best to collect that information about seizures in a very standardized fashion. So what you see here is the actual seizure diaries that if children who participate in the study, their parents or caregivers will receive. What you don't see here, I will say, is that there is a training associated with completing the diary that everybody who participates in the study will go through. There's also an opportunity to discuss with the study physician what those different seizure types are. So at the top above the page fold line are the countable motor seizures, and they're separated into different categories. You have the opportunity to talk to the doctor about what those seizures look like for your child and establish a common language around that. And then also to capture the duration of the seizure approximately, whether or not rescue medication was used, if seizures were part of a cluster. And then we do recognize, again, based on feedback from the community, as well as discussions with what we call key opinion leader physicians who know this condition intimately, is that there are sometimes seizures that really aren't countable because they happen so quickly or in these massive clusters. So some of the seizure types that are more difficult to count, we're still capturing them, and they're more exploratory endpoints. And you can see that at the bottom where you just answer a yes or no question about whether or not your child had those types of seizures. I'm just going to take a pause. Hillary or Casey, are there any questions or things that I may have missed?
Yeah, there's one question, and we do have some site questions. I'll save those for the end, but the sort of specific study question from Tyler: can lab draws be done at another hospital and sent to the trial hospital? Meaning, could you go to your local hospital and save a visit to the trial hospital for a lab draw?
So I can't answer that as a blanket statement. What I will say is that the lab draws are all in the context of a study visit where there's other procedures going on that require the family to be on site.
Okay.
That said, we do our best to accommodate families, and those are really kind of maybe one-off discussions.
Yeah.
I will say also that in the context of a clinical trial, we typically choose a single lab provider to run all of the labs for the study. And we do our best to work through that, again, to keep everything kind of as standardized as possible and to demonstrate that people are being measured on the same with the same types of standards.
So is it safe to say from just a family perspective, the standardization is super important, right? From an experiment perspective to keep everything really clear. However, I think it's fair to say that Neurocrine fully recognizes that we are a really complex and heterogeneous patient population. And so if there are accommodations that need to be considered, they should speak with their PI about them or potential PI.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. And then we have another question. In the diary, you provided space for up to 5 seizures of a specific type. What do you do when there's more than 5 seizures of a specific type in a day?
So my understanding,
Or
I could
10.
be misspeaking, is that caregivers will be provided with a number of sheets of these seizure diaries. So if you have to go onto more than one sheet, that's perfectly acceptable. As you can see at the top, there is the space for the date. So there's no assumption that it's only going to be 1 page per day.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hillary, just one other comment to add back to the question around, not needing to travel to the trial site. We do recognize that it's incredibly challenging to travel. We do have support available. There's a vendor that works with all of our trial sites to try to make accommodations to help out with the logistics. I know the adapted SUV and adapted van, session was certainly enlightening for me, and we fully recognize there's incredible amount of challenges to logistically and financially to be able to make it to those site visits. So we are fully aware of that, and we do everything we can to try to make make it as feasible as possible for the families.
Yeah. So actually that raises a really good question. And I think, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but from planning of the visits, your vendor, do they do sort of a concierge service where they arrange all the flights and those kinds of things?
I'll jump in because this is one where each site may have a slightly different arrangement based on what they've already got at the site, their preference, their ways of working. We do have a central vendor that we make available to the sites to support these kinds of things. And not every family needs the same types of services. So we've tried to set it up to be as flexible as possible to what each family needs. So sort of a bespoke support. But again, that's something to talk through with your study side as you are thinking about all the other aspects of the trial. Being able to get there and attend to the visits is important, and it's important to make sure that that's doable for you.
So is it fair to say to families, if you're in, geographically kind of far from a site that's open, but you're interested, you shouldn't let if you're willing to travel, you shouldn't let the distance be a deter you from reaching out to a site that's close to you or that you're, for one reason or another, are interested in visiting.
That's right. And as far as sites as well, just since we're talking about that, if you do have sites that you think are interested in the study, feel free to provide them to Casey, Hillary to share back to us, and we will be happy to follow up on those as well.
Okay. And there were, I don't know if you saw in the chat, questions about sites in Canada, including specifically CHIO. So consider them flagged as as interested sites.
Duly noted.
Great. Okay, so let's, that was a good kind of break because we're going to segue into talking about the clinician or caregiver global impressions. So the clinical global impressions, I'll start by saying, is these really started out as scales that were completed only by the study physician. And they were really adapted from a different therapeutic area, a different condition, and really just a single question meant for the clinician, when it came to severity, to use their judgment and experience with the totality of patients in that given condition to understand how severe their illness was, and then for change to understand how the illness is changing in response to time and or a treatment in the case of a clinical trial. So I wanted to put this up just to give you some perspective. We are using it in the clinical trial, and our physicians are being asked to capture this for SCN8A, and they're looking at how severe the illness is in the past 7 days, and then the change compared to what we call baseline, which would be not when the child when you sign up to be in the study, it's that first day when they're qualified and start the study drug. So we're constantly measuring change relative to right before they started. So how does this relate to what we're going to be asking caregivers? And I'm going to start by saying that this is one of several forms that parents will be asked to fill out during the study, or several assessments. But this is one of our key secondary measures. So I'm focusing on this because it's really a chance for parents. If you don't think that everything is getting captured in that seizure diary, and there are non-seizure outcomes that are important, we recognize that. This is an opportunity to capture some of that when you make your judgment around how severe is my child's illness at this given point, and do I think that they're experiencing change? So for the impression of severity, this is the question that the caregiver is asked, and this was specifically worded for the kayak study. I will read this one, and then we'll see that the change question is very similar. It says, think about the past week, including today, and then provide your rating of the overall severity of the child's symptoms of DEE. This might include seizure frequency, seizure intensity, or how bad the seizures are, how much the seizures get in the way of daily life, and other associated symptoms such as sleep problems, language problems, concentration or thinking difficulties, or any other symptoms the child may have experienced that you believe are part of the DEE. You should consider the symptoms and the effect of the symptoms had on the child's functioning at home, with friends, at school, or anything else in their life. Please don't include illnesses that are not related to the DEE, such as the flu, and don't include any quote-unquote side effects that you think a drug might be causing. So this was developed to be as global or as all-encompassing as possible, to really think about your whole child as it relates to their SCN8A DEE. And after you think about this question, then you're asked to score it with a rating of 1 to 5 on how severe you think your child's illness is. So 1 would be they have no illness, and 5 would be very severe, and you have choices in between. So we had a bit of a discussion with Hillary about this, and she had lots of questions. So I know in the future we'd kind of put the severity and the change scores side by side. So you'll also be, the baseline visit is only severity, because you can't measure change if you haven't started something new. Every visit after baseline, you do both severity and an impression of change. So you answer a very similar question as you did for severity, but now you're saying, how are they doing now? Or how much have they changed in comparison to how they were at baseline? And you're also asked or challenged to try to tease apart if there's another illness going on, or if there's side effects. And I will also mention that if you find yourself struggling with this or any parent-reported measure that you're asked to fill out, you may find it a little odd if you ask for help, and the study coordinator or the study physician kind of says, well, just use your best judgment, and you're looking for something more. But these are really truly meant to be your impressions without any interference or opinion of the clinician, because they're doing their own assessments, and we want to understand how you think your child is changing. Now, this one, when you go to rate the change, is a little bit different than the severity. And that's because we recognize that there are different things that can happen in response to a new intervention or over time. Your child might stay the same. They might have no change. They might improve, or they might worsen. And we want to capture that range of potential outcomes in order to really understand if a medication is helping. So I've covered the two types of measurements that in the kayak study that really are going to be front and center in our achieving our primary and key secondary objective. And now I really want to tie that back to meaningful change. So I know there's much discussion, not just in the DEE community, but even with regulators in the FDA regarding what constitutes meaningful change, and do we have the right tools to measure that? One of the frustrating things I know for the DEE community is a lot of the tools that we're using have not been specifically developed with these communities in mind. And they frustrate us as developers because it's difficult to detect change in them, or they might not be sensitive enough. And the FDA has also called on us to develop what they call fit for purpose, or measurements that are really going to help us understand how interventions help families and help children, patients feel better, function better, and or survive longer. So with that, I'd love for us to kind of ask all of you to think like researchers, not just in the context of a clinical trial, but there's other ways to apply this. And one of them is just in general, what are your objectives for your child? That's a question I'll put out. We want to know that. And I know we've had many conversations. It's an ongoing conversation with the SCN8A community around that, of what aspects of the condition are really driving the desire to change treatments or find new treatments, and what would be meaningful for you. And then how do we measure that? What are the endpoints that we can use to capture meaningful improvements in how your children are feeling, functioning, and surviving? And finally, there's opportunities to contribute to developing better endpoints and to learning more about the condition. And many of you I have participated in registries, questionnaires, natural history studies, and hopefully will have the opportunity to participate in clinical trials to better understand.
That's amazing, Carolyn. Thank you so much. I'm going to put those questions right into the chat so you can pull down your slides if you want, so you can see us, because I know it's easier to engage in conversation when you can actually see everybody. Thank you so much for that. I feel like these details are really important for families to understand as they're considering this trial, or also just even understanding, if they're not considering the trial, what their friends in the community may be facing as they consider the trial, right? And I am a firm believer in seeing trials in communities like this as the whole community is going through the trial, right? Even if you're not in it, you're supporting a community moving through it. So I just appreciate the level of detail that you went into about what people can anticipate. We did get a question specifically around the impression of change in severity. Mm-hmm. Shelley asked, she loves seeing sleep, language, and concentration sort of listed in those considerations. Can the parents sort of, those are examples, right? The parents can pull from anything that they see as part of the disorder.
Yes, it's not an exhaustive list. It's meant to give examples of kind of every aspect that's relevant to your child. So if one of those things listed isn't relevant, then don't consider it.
Right. And so I think this is important, and maybe we can double click on this a little bit. You specifically say things that aren't associated with SCN8A, right? So if your child is sick and has, a nasty virus and that's affected their well-being for the week, you're supposed to kind of do your very best to kind of dissect that out from what the disease is. So the converse is true. You can pull in more things that are relevant, but also you need to dissect out the things that aren't associated with the disorder.
Yes, and we recognize that's incredibly challenged, not just for caregivers, but also for clinicians. So yeah, it really is okay, if we just had a really bad week that was not related specifically to the condition, then let's keep that in mind. Yeah. But I understand it can be challenging as a parent. You say, well, the reason they got the flu is they're prone to this because of the problem stemming from their SCN8A. So we are relying on your judgment and trying to give some guidelines on how to answer that. But it is.
And it seems like in the important part is consistency across the times that you answer the question, right? Like considering the same things so that your answer, so you're keeping your baseline steady, right? So you approach it the same way every time.
Right. So you keep in mind and hopefully have some access to what you based your severity on at baseline so that you can refer back to it and really remind yourself, okay, where were we at on that week prior to starting this new study treatment? Yes, because I know life gets crazy, right? And sometimes week 6 or 8, we might forget what was going on yesterday versus 6 or 8 weeks ago.
We have another answer regarding the objectives for a child. An offer of, and I realize I was saying names. I think you guys hide the chat, right, at Neurocrine, so I probably shouldn't say names. I'm sorry. I'm out of practice at this. But so this individual says that her child, the biggest measurable change would be impulse control. We measure this with happy faces. When he swears or hits someone, he gets a mad face. I would love to see 11 out of 11 happy faces in a day, and we're hovering around 8. I love this. It's very
and that's
real.
A great example. The happy faces those are in part of the reason in this study we really focus on the caregivers and relying on your reports of how your child is doing, as we recognize that the kind of ability to communicate across the SCN8A DEE population can be limited. But that's a beautiful illustration of the fact that many children's measurements use things like faces to understand how they're doing. And it's important. That'll be important feedback for the future. I would personally love to know kind of how wide-ranging the ability to do that among kids with SCN8A would be, because it's always ideal to measure the direct experience of the person who is receiving the treatment. We just know it's a little bit more difficult in kids with DEE.
Absolutely. We have another family flagging sleep, which, yes, hallelujah. We track time to fall asleep, number of night wakings, length of night wakings, and total duration of sleep. When sleep is better, other facets of life improve: engagement, therapy, play, seizure control, etc. I feel like this is, yes, just such an important part of the experience with children with DEEs, SCN8A in particular, and also really important from a logistical standpoint as you're looking at bringing families into the study to not be disrupting their sleep patterns when they're traveling to you. and get inadvertent changes in impression of where they are at any given moment, and also seizure count, because disruption of sleep is absolutely a terrible playmate with seizures.
So it sounds like at least probably many of the parents who are listening today, and many in your community, have their own outcome measures that they're tracking. You're tracking for your kids. So you're already like almost pros at doing this. It's just a couple of new tools. But this is all really helpful, and in understanding kind of when you go to do that global rating, what it is you have in mind that you're hoping will change in addition to seizures, and whether or not it's changing.
Do you have any scales that are associated with sleep as part of the trial specifically?
No, I'll have to look that up. I know that we have, like I said, we have other scales. I know additional scales looking at seizure severity. We have something like the Vineland.
Okay.
So we are measuring different aspects of the condition. I have to double check on the sleep.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. So for takeaway for families, what seems really important here is, if you do have your own outcome measures that are important to you, these two families are examples of, like, these are their priorities right now, baseline for their child. If they were to be enrolled and into the study, that could sort of be their basis for how they answer your questionnaires, right? It could be one of the main things that they take into consideration, and it would allow them to maintain consistency in what they're considering across answering. I think families realize, or don't always realize, that they're doing scientific research at home all the time, but they absolutely are, and they're really good at it.
Yes. Well, my first boss, when I was working in clinical research at a study site, used to tell parents all the time that every time we start a new treatment, it's a clinical trial. Because especially in kids across the board, especially that long ago, there are very few treatments that are specifically approved in their age group. And even if they are, those studies are large groups of people. Every time we start something new, we don't really know exactly how it's going to work for the individual. So every time is a clinical trial.
That's a really powerful way to think about it, and I think really empowering for these parents. Carolyn, thank you so much for that, because all of these parents have done this process, right? They've brought a new med on, and all of us know the experience of going to your doctor after you brought a new med on, and the doctor's like, "How is it going?" And you're like, "Oh, this is to me," right? It's like, this is to me to tell you if it's working, and what I need to be thinking about in preparation for that conversation. So I think that's just really empowering to know, yes, this is our first official clinical trial for SCN8A, but we know how to do this.
Yeah.
And we do it well. Amazing. Thank you. Another question. Does having another diagnosis other than SCN8A disqualify for this type of trial? Not sure if that's been asked. So no, it hasn't been asked. Thank you for that question. So I guess I'm going to imagine having another diagnosis other than SCN8A. If you could clarify in the chat if you're talking about another sort of genetic epilepsy or another genetic diagnosis, or perhaps another underlying, an autism diagnosis.
Not necessarily. This is one of those ones where you'll say, we'll do the kind of company line, is it really need to talk to a study physician about that. Typically you'll see kind of most studies say something of, any other condition that will kind of maybe take precedence like that. If there's a primary condition that's driving all of the difficulties, and that might be, but it really is the discussion with the clinician, and to do kind of a full evaluation of your child and where they're at, what's going on with them, to determine if this is a good fit for them.
Okay. So again, is it fair to say with this patient population, just like the distance, the geographic location, the travel, we don't want anyone who is interested in learning more about the trial to presume that something, unless it is listed on that study, the study exclusion, and even then, maybe it's worth a conversation. Lean towards reaching out, asking a PI or your physician before you disqualify yourself if you are interested in learning more.
Yes.
Casey, do you have some questions to weigh in on?
I was just going to say, you know, coming from a mother of a pretty severe child, that I just appreciate the thought that you guys have put around the parent, the caregiving forms that they fill out. Because, you know, in our case, if we were to go through this, and maybe the severity has just barely changed as far as seizures, but we're seeing her alert and wide awake during the day, and maybe less GI issues and more smiles and more giggles and things like that. That is enough for me to say, I don't know what's going on, but we're going to want to keep this. So I just appreciate how much you guys have really looked at just general quality of life and not just seizures, and how much, you know, that affects our community, and how maybe the severity of their comorbidities are changing when maybe seizures, you know, depending, it could go up or down, but as if the other things are kind of falling into place, that means a lot to us as caregivers and to our kids.
Thank you. And I've been kind of darting my eyes to the side because I wanted to double check about the sleep question. So we don't have a specific sleep questionnaire in this study. So that's something that, if it's important for your child in the context of this trial, would get picked up in something like a global impression of change, and perhaps in individual questions in some of the other measures that are included.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe
I wanted to make sure we answered the question about Canadian sites as well. We are looking at sites in Canada. They're a little further off though, so we're not quite at a point where we're ready to share locations, but they are across Canada. I would expect to see those come up sometime next year.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. And, you know, it's so hard for families that are excited and in locations where they don't know. So appreciate, again, your willingness to share as much as you can, as soon as you can, so that families can start to think about their options. And certainly with a disorder like this, where kids are so severely affected, there's an urgency there. So again, appreciate it.
Maybe just a recap real quick for parents, because now they might be like, ooh, I wasn't really thinking about it. But now that you've talked about some of these new sites coming on and, you know, helping with possible travel, things like that. So if they're interested, what's the first thing they need to do right now? Go to what website would be the best for the place to start?
Yeah, so that's going to be kayakstudy.com. And there is a brief questionnaire that will register you as an interested person, family. Even if there isn't a site right now, then our team will be able to connect you as and when. So that information, it is there and accessible. It's not a black hole. So that would be the place to go. And as I said, we are working on providing additional information to make it easier for you to contact sites that are recruiting directly, and that should be coming in the next few weeks.
Wonderful. We have
just
also.
Add, you may see, sorry, on the slides themselves, you may have noticed at the kind of a footer on the bottom of the slide that was kayakresearchstudy.com. It's the same, kayakstudy.com, kayak research. It was just a link specifically for this presentation, so we could know, like, oh, this presentation, you know, sort of may have benefited families and kind of drove them to.
Sorry.
Same thing.
And And I guess to that end, I did put the link to kayakstudy.com in the chat, but we will share the slides in the support group, and so people can use those. We did get a question just now in the chat, kind of along the lines of the Canadian question. Do we have any forecast on when to expect trials coming up in Europe?
Yeah, that's the same. It's going to be sometime next year.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And there is a question, will there ever be a consideration for children to enter the trial without countable motor seizures?
So I can take this one. I would say we don't have plans for that right now, especially because in this trial, that's our primary outcome measure, and there is actually an inclusion criteria of a certain number for the study. What I can tell you, and this relates a little bit to the website, kayakresearchstudy.com, is that I was skeptical about how this would work with a rare condition, but we did use this for another trial and another rare pediatric DEE, and it worked quite well. And one of the things that if you go on to the website, and there will be kind of what they call a pre-screener. There's a couple questions that caregivers have to answer to see if they qualify to be kind of put on the list to be referred to a site. The company we're working with to do this, they track. And so say we have a lot of people who went onto that website and they're disqualifying because they don't meet the age criteria. It's very basic, but or something like they don't have motor seizures. We get all of that feedback. So once we see kind of how most people are disqualified for these reasons, we can evaluate and say, okay, can we accommodate for that in the current study, or is that something to keep in mind for the future? And it's worked really well, and we do kind of dip into that, what's coming through the website quite frequently to make decisions about the trial.
And I think I'd like to just add to that, just again for family focus on a high level. There's the study, right? The study is the study, and it's very exciting to get into the study and to participate in it if you can. But the ultimate goal of the study is registration of a new drug that will then be available for use in the patient population. And so assuming we get there, this potential treatment becomes another tool in the toolbox. So for a child who might not quite meet the criteria because they're not having quite enough seizures, it doesn't mean that down the line that isn't a potential choice for them to be made. It's a ways out, but I think it's easy to lose sight of there's the trial, and the ultimate goal is having another available treatment for this entire community. So just want to make sure that everyone is thinking along those lines. Now, I know we're kind of at time. We're a little bit over clocker. But I do just want to do one more question. We have a question from someone saying, are you saying to go to the website and sign up, even if your child is not, for instance, in the age range or has another exclusion criteria?
I'm going to not discourage.
Okay.
I can't guarantee that there will be immediate action if it's outside of that, but it is an opportunity for us to understand the interest and demand and what the characteristics are of caregivers and patients who might be interested in participating in research.
Thank you.
And on a related note, even if you say, okay, the 8 trial sites that are soon to be recruiting, those aren't near me, I would still encourage you to go and register interest, because then you can be contacted when there is a site that opens near you, or you can get in touch with the closest site to understand is it feasible for me to travel. It just can't hurt to explore further, and also to register your interest.
Yeah. So I think that if the clear takeaway here from today is, don't exclude yourself because you think something might not fit perfectly. Ask for information, go to the site, reach out to your closest PI or your clinician to discuss what the optionality would be here, rather than, if you are interested, rather than assume you can't participate. So on that note, as always, it's just such a pleasure to see all of you, and so grateful for your time and your focus, and deeply, deeply, deeply appreciative to be at this point in the SCNA Day history that we find ourselves. And please pass along. You can't see it in the chat, but there's a ton of people saying thank you, and please pass along our gratitude to the team at Neurocrine. We're really grateful for your focus and your hard work, and we're eager for these next steps and continued communication around the trial.
Thank you. Thank you, Hillary.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Casey. Thanks, families. And also thank you. We have several members of our study team listening in, so I want to make sure to acknowledge indeed their hard work. So we look forward to talking with you more, and welcome any other feedback or questions that you have. You can send those via Casey and Hillary. We'll do our best to respond, and we're looking forward to being able to provide you some more of that site information that you can act on, and take very good care of yourselves and your families. I know you do.
Thank you. And again, thanks for your sponsorship. Neurocrine leads sponsorship in this process of meaningful change, so we can get this information out to families and have these conversations. So greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess with that, we have to close the series, right?
Yes. Yeah. This is it for this year. And like I said, we've got some tools that we're hoping to do some more workshops with now that we've had these conversations. So very exciting stuff coming up, and we'll keep in touch on Facebook.
Yes, and congratulations, Casey, on planning your very first Meaningful Change series as our executive director. You did a beautiful job, and we're all so impressed and grateful.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
All right, well, let's close it out. Thank you guys so much for your involvement. Thank you to Neurocrine and Praxis for their sponsorship. And thank you, as always, most importantly, for families to show up, watch the videos afterwards, engage, because if we do this and no one shows up, we can't do them. So it's all about you, and we're just so grateful to everyone.
Yes.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.